Welcome back to Epilogues, an unpacking of the weekly Haftorah. You're listening to Rabbi Yaakov Trump. This week we're going to be learning the Haftorah of Parashas Balak. The Haftorah of Parashas Balak is drawn from Sefer Micha, Perek Hey, Pasuk Vov to Perek Vov, Pasuk Ches. In order to understand this properly, let's try to appreciate the background of the book of Micha, who was Micha first, and then we'll try to understand the words in this particular prophecy. So the Gemara tells us in Pesachim Daf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph that Micha was in fact a prophet among many. He was one of four contemporaries who prophesied at the time, and those prophets were Yeshayahu, Hoshea, Amos, and he was the fourth, Micha. In fact, we know that he was the junior of all of these four. At the time, the kings of the north are Yerovam, Achaz, and the later revolutions leading to the destruction of the northern kingdom, and the south, Yotam, Achaz, and Fani Chizkiah Melech. So he's really living at the tail end of the northern kingdom and are witnessing its destruction and exile at the hands of Assyria. We also know that Micha lives in a place called Morashia, or Moresha, which is today known as Tel Maresha, which is in central Israel. So the Beit Gurin or the Beit Jibrin area is the area that he would where he would live. It is interesting that he is later quoted by Sefer Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu quotes Micha on a very famous prophecy in which he says, "Lachen biglalchem Tzion sadeh techaresh, Yerushalayim iyim tiyeh." He talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. This was many years before Jerusalem will be destroyed. This is the era of the end of the era of plenty in the north and the south, and it's as the northern kingdom is slowly sinking into its demise. It is interesting to note that he actually lives in the south. That means he lives in Judea, but he is prophesying to the north, to Israel, which is unusual because Amos and Hoshea were also prophesying to the north, but they lived in the north. So very interesting perspective. It's a perspective of so to speak, the person calling out. They see the iceberg on the Titanic, but nobody else is listening. That's really where Micha and Hoshea and Amos are standing. And in fact, what they say is going to happen does in fact happen. So let's turn to our prophecy itself. Let's look at the section of Micha which is in our Haftarah. And the section that we'll divide into two. The first part is the end of Perek Hey, and the second part is the beginning of Perek Vov in Micha. So let's look at the first section, a brief overview, and then some basic points to ponder. The description is the She'iris Yaakov, the remainder of Jacob, which refers to Israel in a state of exile, that are going to be, he says, Bekerev Amim Rabim. You're going to be scattered among many nations, and he gives two metaphors as to what that scattering will look like. One is Kirvivim Alei Esav, Ketal Me'es Hashem Kirvivim Alei Esav, like dew and rain upon the vegetation. That lo yachel livnei adon, that won't trust in any human beings. And the other one, the description he says is ka'aryeh b'masyar k'kfir be'edrei tzon, is like this lion among the animals, this young lion in the flocks of sheep is what Israel will be. And there'll be no saviors, or no need for saviors as well. And then it describes how their enemies will be cut down, and on the day that their enemies will cut down, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty, is going to take away all of the powers of the time, whether it be the susecha, the horses, whether it be the idol worship, keshafim, sorcery, pesilecha, your images. All these things are going to be destroyed. To destroy all these nations. So it sounds like it's describing exile. It's describing the resolute state of the nation of Israel in exile, and it sounds like retribution. How do we read this section? What's really going on? Barbanel, in his commentary on Micha, points out that there are two ways of reading this section. One is, it refers to the Jews in the nation of Israel who will be in Golus and exile in every nation, and the overlords will come to fight Israel, but they won't be on their own volition. Rather, they'll be like rain, meaning it's the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Israel will trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not their physical allies. So the general idea is, as is explained by the Barbanel in version 1, is that all those who come to defame and hurt Israel are really coming at the behest of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem will ultimately protect them, even though they have to go through this process. The second way of reading this is that it refers to the remains of the Golus, the remains of those in exile who will be among the different nations, and there will be those who did good for them, and there will be those who don't do good for them, and those who do good will succeed and grow, and those who did bad to Israel will be torn apart. So Israel will be like this rain in in the nations, and which will bring about good to those nations who do good, but the lion will be the expression of Israel tearing up and destroying those who do bad. So either this is the way that Hashem is controlling the exile process, or it's the way that Israel will bless or curse those who are in exile. Rabbi Mendel Hirsch, in the oldest son of Rav Shimshon, Raphael Hirsch, comments over here that in fact this refers to the way that Israel will bring their value system to the nations of the world. To quote Rav Mendel Hirsch, he says, "It will carry forth its teachings that all men are the children of God, that the true worth of human beings is not based on race or position, power and coercion are but transitory. In the midst of the nations who are accessible to these truths, Yaakov will be like dew, like the restorative rain that transforms the desert of humanity into a place blossoming beauty and flourishing prosperity." So this is the idea of values, that Israel will disperse its values among the world. And this is something we have seen over the last 2,000 years as Israel has spread monotheism, whether it be directly or through we'll call the daughter religions, the spin-offs of Judaism with Christianity and Islam, which later developed based on Judaism to spread the ideas and values of Israel among the world. That's what's being described over here in this blessing. What's the difference between dew and rain? So there's one fascinating thing is that rain you can see when it's coming down. But it disappears after it falls, it's absorbed in the ground. With dew, you can't see it falling, you can only see when it appears. Israel is like dew, it'll only be distinct it'll only be visible when it is distinct, when it is separate, not while it's actually being. How does this section relate to our parasha in Balak before we move to the next section? So the basic answer is that Zimri had an argument, as the Gemara points out in this in the subtext. The Gemara in Sanhedrin has a subtext to understanding the episode that happens at the end of Parshas Balak, in which Zimri says, why is that people are dying because of a plague? Because they are having relationships with Midianite and Moabite women. Surely Moshe Rabbeinu, you yourself married a Midianite woman. So why should that be? And that's why he commenced this public relationship with Cosby, as a demonstration that really there should be no problem. After all, the leader of Israel married a Midianite woman. Now, obviously, that was before the giving of the Torah, which was one of the flaws in his argument. But nonetheless, the Haftorah is emphasizing that, in fact, going back to the prophecy of Bilam, which is Hein Am Levadad Yishkon V'Goyim Lo Yischashav, the way that perhaps Israel will have its longevity, will have its success, will be by being distinct and separate. And if Israel's not going to be separate, if Israel's not going to maintain its identity, then it will be lost. Which is what the Haftorah is arguing over here, is Israel, you have your own mission, you have your unique identity, don't lose it even in the diaspora. And that's what's being said over here. We move to the second section of the Torah, which is the Perek Vav in Mecha. And in this section over here, Hashem now turns to them and says and reprimands them. He says, "Kum rives ha'orim v'tishmana gvois kolecha." Listen, O mountains and valleys, to your voice. And he says, listen to what I'm about to tell you. Because Hashem has an argument, a bone to pick with his nation. He says, look what I did for you. I took you out of the nation of the land of Egypt. I brought you up and I gave you leaders, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. And now look Balak the king of Moab tried to do to you. Look what Bilam ben Beor tried to do from you from Shittim, that's on the east bank of the Jordan, to Gilgal, which is on the west side of the Jordan. Leman del dasid kos Hashem. Why did Hashem bring you into the land of Israel? To know the righteousness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu then goes on to say, in the end of the day, Higid lecha adam hatov. I'm going to tell you what is good. Ma Hashem doresh mimcha. What is it that Hashem wants from you, O Israel? Ki masos mishpat v'avas chesed v'atznei alech esem elokecha. To do righteousness, to do kindness, and to walk in a modest way in front of God. So that's the argument of the second part directed at Israel explicitly. So a few basic points over here. Why are the hills and mountains being called into this argument? So Abarbanel says they're witnesses. They've always been here. They've sort of witnessed the trajectory of history. The Targum says no, they're metaphoric for the patriarchs and matriarchs are being called to witness the ills of their children. What's the general claim of this section? What's really going on here? So the Radak says Hashem is claiming, what bad did I do for you? Meaning I gave you all this, and then I gave you commandments, and still you rejected me. The Abarbanel says that the tone's a little bit different. He says, look at all the good I've done for you, and look at and show me the good you have done in return. Meaning, how have you paid back my investment in you as well? Now, why are Bilam and Balak being enlisted in this Haftarah? What's the point of them being called in here? So there's 2 points over here. Says Rav Mendel Hirsch in his commentary on the Haftarah. Number one is is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, look, when they wanted to fight, who did they turn to? They turned to a higher power. They turned to find a sorcerer, to find some sort of higher power, to enlist the power of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But in the end of the day, when you are in trouble, you don't do that. You turn to allies. In the north, you try to find the Aram and all these other nations to fight against Assyria. That's inappropriate. You understand that even the Moabites understood that you need to call to a higher power, not colleagues. That's number one. And number two is that if you remember the blessing of Bilam, what did Bilam say? He says, Hashem Elokav imo trust melech bo yah. When are you successful? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with you. If you want to succeed, make sure Hashem is with you as well. Finally, it's interesting that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ends this prophecy as described by Micha. It describes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from you three things, and those three things are as we just described a moment, justice, kindness, and modesty in walking in front of Hashem. The Gemara in Makos on Daf Chav Daled Aleph tells us a very fascinating observation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had 613 mitzvahs, and different prophets came and diminished them to lesser numbers. The penultimate one is Micha, which is our Haftorah, in which he summarizes all the Torah into three mitzvahs, which are the ones that are described over here. What does that mean precisely? So Rashi explains that as the generations diminished, then not only as there's a progression in the expansion of Israel, there was diminishing the spiritual capacity of people, and people were not able to do as much. They could really do many commandments. In the later generations, they weren't so great, and they could only take on fewer mitzvahs, which is why the Torah was summarized into this. The Maharal in Tiferes Yisrael actually has a different perspective on this. And he explains in Perek Nun Daled that what's been described over here is not that all these prophets were diminishing the Torah, God forbid, but rather they were summarizing what are the principles. If you distill what the Torah is supposed to make, what this Torah system is supposed to produce, is supposed to be people who are exemplifying these traits. And what Micha said is the traits that you need to exemplify are justice, that's asais mishpat, avas chesed, loving kindness, and hatznei aleches im. And Hashem is saying to them, if you are not producing people, if you're not producing a nation which does this, then there's obviously something about the way that you're doing this, because the system is not working if it's not producing such people. A question that Micha raised to the people at that time, a question that we read in the Haftorah to raise to ourselves. Is living a Torah lifestyle producing that in us, or are we missing the boat? Is the Torah simply padding and giving comfort to the mission that we chose in life, or is it producing what Hashem wanted from us in life? With this, we conclude. In the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful day and a great